Need to create a complex enterprise Angular application? Angular Bootcamp is an intensive 3-day workshop class to learn the basics of Angular through sophisticated techniques for real-world applications. We target Angular 6 and the recent versions, with much of the curriculum is suitable back to Angular 2. Or go beyond the 3-day class with a consultation or project launch with Oasis Digital, the team behind Angular Bootcamp. We can assist your team or launch your project with advanced Angular topics including scalability, data flow, state management, full-stack product design, and more. Contact us for a private class at your location or buy a ticket for public classes in various cities around the U.S. and occasionally in Europe. Online live instructor training is also available at angularbootcamp.com.
Welcome everybody back to an Adventures in Angular podcast. And this week, we have a special guest, Asim Hussain. But before we get to him, learning about AI with JavaScript, we also have on our panel, Ward Bell.
Hello, everyone.
And myself, John Papa. And Asim, tell us about yourself.
Hi. Well, my name's Asim Hussain. I've been developing for, I think, 17 years. I'm doing Angular, I think, for 5 years. I have the website codecraft.tv and the book Angular from Theory to Practice. So that's how I'm known in the Angular space. I'm also a developer advocate at Microsoft, working with a few other people, including you. And I'm also I co-run the meetup group in London, AI JavaScript, and I'm just really big into Angular, really big into AI these days, and I just wanted to talk to you guys about it.
Asim, is there anything you don't do?
There's something I don't do. I don't exercise. I don't eat healthy.
That's extraordinary. I don't believe that looking at you.
Yes. No.
Yeah, for those of you who can't see Asim is about 7'10", I think, right?
Thin as a rail.
10, 11, yeah.
Yeah. He looks great. And,
so when you talk to us about this, about doing this podcast, I like this one because it's about an interesting topic for me, AI, artificial intelligence. But I think a great place to start would be, what does AI mean to you, and where do you think this fits into the JavaScript ecosystem?
Oh, that's two interesting questions. So I think AI is all about getting machines. I'm interested in a lot. Part of AI I'm interested in is machine learning. So getting machines to learn behaviors so they can perform certain tasks in a far more efficient than perhaps like a human being could do, right? At a greater scale and like that. That opens up lots of opportunities, right? I don't know if do I need to go through and justify AI's existence, or should we?
Well, I don't think justify it so much as, I think the problem I see a lot of times is, how do people, myself included, when you think about AI, it sounds cool. I think of Star Wars and stuff that Ward loves, but well, where am I going to use it in my real world, right? How does this apply to something you're going to actually build with?
Well, I tell you where I kind of got into AI. This is years and years ago. How I got into AI at the start. That was actually to build recommendation systems. So I had an events website, and based off of the events that you chose to go to, I wanted to then surface other events to people based off of those events. And this was a long time ago. Facebook, I think a year later, added that feature to its kind of event system. But the tools and the technologies that you use to do that were basically based off of AI. So we basically get a data set. So the data set would be the events that you chose to go to. And I also had events that you would explicitly click no to. And you'd essentially train a model based off that data. And so then later on, it can infer whether or not you would like to go to an event or not go to an event based off of past data. So that was using a Bayesian model. It's very, very simple. In fact, that's what spam filtering in your inbox is all based on these kind of models, these kind of AI learning models. So I suppose not seeing spam is probably one of the most important things that AI has ever done. But yeah, so it's all kind of based off of that. That's how I got into it. I then didn't really keep a track of it for a long time. And then I only really got back into it, I'd say, last year. And by that point, I'd become a JavaScript developer. But before, when I was interested in AI previously, I was a Python developer. But since then, I've kind of reformed and became a JavaScript developer. And really, AI and JavaScript has never really found a good marriage until recently. So for a long time, AI didn't stop happening just because I was working on JavaScript. AI world was growing and exploding. Yeah, it was just, I know, it's crazy, right?
I thought it really came out when Asim said, you have to start using AI in JavaScript.
Yeah, that's it. That's when the whole world listened and, followed my suit. What's going on? No, like the AI has been growing exponentially for a long time with the growth of the amount of data that we're collecting from all kinds of places. But as a JavaScript developer, you were kind of like hidden away from it. You kind of heard about this AI stuff that's happening. You knew it was growing big. You knew everybody getting really excited about it. But as a JavaScript developer, it's not your bag. It's like not your thing.
Can you give like an example of like what's something that you've recently done or seen that you could do with AI and JavaScript that was pretty cool, like a cool use case?
Oh, so with JavaScript, some interesting ones. A lot of the interesting ones that I'm seeing are a lot of the fun ones that I'm seeing, to be honest with you, because I think this is one of the interesting things about when I talk about JavaScript, we really talk about the web community. When we talk about the web community, we're talking, I think, about some of the most creative developers on the planet. So as soon as you give them the power of AI, you start seeing some incredibly creative things being built and some really fun stuff. A very, very fun demo I saw recently was there's an actual library called Magenta.js, which sits on top of TensorFlow.js, which allows you to do AI with music, which is really interesting. And you're holding a guitar right now. I think you might be interested in that. So you can basically train an AI with kind of past kind of musical notes, and it will then basically infer a new song based out of it. And there's some really, and that's just a few things they've built. In terms of TensorFlow.js, they've built, there's a library called PoseNet, which is very exciting. I'm really looking forward to start using for a few demos. But essentially, they can, you can detect faces. Oh, you can detect faces with JavaScript now as well with the face API. There's all these things. You can detect faces now directly from within JavaScript, directly from within the browser. You could do facial detection, which detects the features of your face in real time, live. I mean, these are things that perhaps if you're building a native iOS or a native Android application, you would have kind of plugins in order to be able to do that. It was a lot harder to do that in JavaScript. You can now do that in JavaScript. Which kind of opens up a lot of possibilities.
If I walk through that for a second, through a scenario like that you just laid out, tell me where I'm right or wrong on this. Let's say you build a web application with JavaScript and you want to do some kind of face recognition. Like you want to write an app called Wordbell or not Wordbell. Right?
Yeah.
So
everybody's doing that. Yeah.
That's a great one.
And I encourage all of our listeners to make this app and share it with us on Twitter so we can really, really get you recognition.
Or like a website that says, "Are you Ward Bell?" And there's only one person in the world that can access it.
Exactly.
There you go.
Or the opposite way around. Everybody can access it but Ward Bell.
That's it. No word here.
The one thing you wanted to know about Ward Bell, and only people who are not Ward Bell.
You know what? And I just put on a Darth Vader mask and I'd be in.
So if you built that app with JavaScript, write it in JavaScript, Angular, React, whatever, you would be able to then, in this case, when thinking it through, you could either upload a picture of yourself or you could use the camera because we can access the camera through the browser, right?
Yep, exactly.
And then take that image and then send that to some API somewhere, like some web-hosted API that then processes it and says, against some baseline, you probably have a baseline of Word Bell images that you probably taught the AI.
That's.
Are you disagreeing with me, or is that real?
No, I'm agreeing with you. Because there are lots of APIs that let you do that. I mean, Azure's got a great API that lets you do facial recognition. But the one thing that I think is a really good stuff that's happening right now is with TensorFlow.js and the Face API.js, you can actually detect facial features in the browser without needing to make an API call. And one of the things you can then do is then because you don't want to snap an image and then be sending like every second, polling this API and sending an image from the camera every second, just in case a face appears in the image. Maybe you want to do things in combination so that the JavaScript library is running on the client side. It detects a face. You then snap a picture, call the API, get some more detailed information, and pull it back there. So there's, in terms of how we want to combine.
So that really is an important distinction, Asim, because, I was all ready for you to tell me, you just capture some stuff and then you send it to the back end and the back end grinds on it and tells you something. And that doesn't seem hard. The hard part is all being done back there at the server. But what you're actually talking about is bringing some of the machine learning outcome, actually doing that processing client side.
That's right.
Doing it efficiently client side. That's amazing. Are you really saying
that? That's the amazing stuff that's been happening. So at the start of this year, I was speaking at a conference in Austria, and I was the last speaker of the day. And the MC, and there was a talk, and I was talking about an app I'd created, which was just that, which was using AI, but using it just by making API calls. And he asked me, "Hey Asim, could you just make just a little uplifting? Your last speaker of the day, say something uplifting at the end." And so I came up with this impassioned speech about how JavaScript and AI. 2018 was going to be the year AI or JavaScript developers got into AI. I just had a feeling about it. And then literally a month later or a month or two later, at the TensorFlow conference in America, they announced TensorFlow.js. Have you heard of the words TensorFlow at all?
No, so you're going to tell us what TensorFlow is because it's new to me.
Yeah. So TensorFlow is the most popular machine learning tool out there right now. A tensor is actually just a multi-dimensional array. So I think it goes like scalar, vector, array, two-dimensional array, and I've forgotten how many dimensions you need to get to, but you reach a certain number of dimensions, where you just call it a tensor, and then you carry on from there. And TensorFlow is an application which lets you run mathematical operations on tensors, so lots of matrix multiplication, in an incredibly parallel and efficient way. So it can work parallelly across nodes and also parallelize the calculation on a GPU on a computer. So it's incredibly efficient for doing those types of calculations. Those types of calculations are perfect for doing machine learning especially with neural nets. So that was released, I think, about a year and a half ago or something like that. And it really just took everything by storm. A lot of stuff's being built. A lot of AI these days being built and driven using TensorFlow, using neural nets in TensorFlow. And I can't remember now. Was it April, May? They announced TensorFlow.js. Now, first, when I heard about TensorFlow.js, I just thought it was like a node binding to TensorFlow, like a binding to an application that you can just use so you'd have to have TensorFlow proper installed on your computers in order to be able to use TensorFlow.js. But no, that's not what TensorFlow.js is. TensorFlow.js is a complete rewrite of TensorFlow in JavaScript, which is what's so exciting about TensorFlow.js. So what that means is that you can just drop a script tag. It's as simple as this. You can just drop a script tag in a HTML page and do most of the things that you can do with TensorFlow, but in the browser. And it's really exciting.
No back end, right? I can just cut the wire. I cut the wire and I'm doing something.
You're doing something. And that's the thing. When I talk to people about TensorFlow.js, it's when I show them, here's a script tag. You just add it in the head. You're ready to go. That's it. And they built it. That wasn't by accident. They specifically built it that way for that purpose because they recognized the value in that, right? I mean, you can just create a code pen or something and drop a script tag and you're ready to rock and roll. And I don't know how much should I explain what. So a neural net. I don't know how to explain this. A neural net. This is very easy to explain in a slide. I don't know how to explain this in a podcast, but I'll try. So you in your head, you've got this thing called brains. Well, I do anyway.
I only have one of them, actually.
You only got one of them?
Brains. Yeah.
Yeah. You have a brain. And inside that brain, you have hopefully neurons, but maybe you only got one, I don't know. But you have neurons. Normally, you have neurons. And what these are just, I mean, all that neuron really is like a cell which has some wires going into it and some wires going out of it. And if enough electricity pumps into the wires that go in, the cell might say, okay, I'll pump some electricity out the other side. And the amazing thing is, if you throw millions and millions and billions of these together, you get a John Papa and you get a Ward Bell. You get us. So this very, very simple construct gives us kind of the power to think, right? And so what you can do with, you can actually replicate that on a computer with a neural net, which is essentially just imagine coding that up. Imagine just having a node. Like if you coded this up your hand, lots of people code these things up completely from scratch. Just have a node which has some edges going into it with some weights, and some edges going out of it with some weights. And then you're just connecting a load of these things together. And then the whole thing is basically a bunch of matrix multiplications. And maybe you put them in layers. So you might have like 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 layers or something like that. And each layer, you might have like 100 nodes in the first layer, and then 50, and then 20, and 10, until eventually maybe you get to 1. In the input node, you pump in a bunch of features. So it could be the pixel values of an image. And the output node, you might just have 0 is cat and 1 is dog, right? And then you feed in enough data. So that it's kind of like a graph, right? So the weights in this graph basically get tuned so that when you feed in an image, it just gives you a 0 for a cat and a 1 for a dog. That's basically a neural network, and that's what.
And presumably, you're giving us some training data to help it change those weights,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
So you take some fraction ahead of time. Now, that's the thing that you usually do ahead of time, is my understanding, and that's why I was kind of curious about training in the browser itself. So I guess you're suggesting that the algorithms for training it are such that they are fast enough that I have to show only 10 cats and dogs, and it'll figure out that's enough to get it to figure out cat every time, or what?
Well, this is where it's a really good question. Right? This is where it's really interesting what's going on, because I think that this also helps answer the question of where do JavaScript developers fit in to the AI space, right? So you can, if you're using TensorFlow.js, you can train in the browser. They've built it to enable you to do that. Okay, so you can all the similar APIs that you have to the TensorFlow Python libraries, and you can do all that yourself if you want, right? But the performance is not going to be as good at all than if you're training this on the server side. But you can do that in the browser side, and it's great as a learning tool, if nothing else. But there's two other things you can do with TensorFlow.js, and I think the one thing that's really exciting is load model. Okay, so when you're training these models, so maybe you're training like the cats and dogs one. Maybe you train that on the server side using, I don't know, 10,000 servers, and it took you a week of computationally
That's what I'm expecting. Right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. At the end of the day, you're going to essentially have this giant graph of data with weights inside it. Maybe not even that big, to be honest with you, but a graph of data with weights.
Yeah, that's your model.
That's your model. You can export that. You can export that as a JSON file.
Yep.
Right. With TensorFlow.js, you can load that JSON file.
That's what I'm expecting.
Yeah,
right.
And then you can do it's called inference mode, where you basically is passing in. It's not learning, but you're using it. You're passing in a new image, and it'll tell you if that's a cat or a dog. So with TensorFlow.js, they've actually also built in tools where you can export existing TensorFlow models that have been built using the Python or Keras, which is another kind of layer above TensorFlow Python. But you can essentially export those models and then use them from JavaScript. That's where I think it's going to be really exciting, you see, because I see a future which is going to be a little bit like this. I see a future where you're working in a company, there's a data scientist, machine learning engineer, somebody who's basically built a model, perhaps they've just finished off with just a Python script. Maybe they're a mathematician and they're not very good at developing, and they've just built a batch Python script, built a model. Somebody needs to be able to then take that and create an application out of it. maybe that's where JavaScript developers fit in. Maybe we need to know enough AI in order to be able to take that model and build something with it and use it. Yeah, that's one of the things you can do with it. That's, I think, an exciting model for it. And there's also a thing called transfer learning, which is so incredible. It's just, yeah, there's this thing called transfer learning. Have I blown your mind yet, or have you?
Well,
okay.
we'll let our audience decide.
Okay.
We're going to circle back to what might be some practical applications of doing. Let's stipulate that we're not going to do machine learning in the browser. I'm sorry, we're not going to develop the model in the browser. What we're going to do is take advantage of a model that either we've created or somebody else has been very nice to say, I have a model that does something you want. And so you go shopping for it and you get it. And now there would be some advantage to downloading that, as you say in JSON, and having my application then exploit that with the help of, say, TensorFlow to take inputs through my application and get results right there without my having to go back to the server. Exactly. All right. So I mean, I think that is that the vision you're describing. Let's stick with that idea for the moment. That would be the developer flow.
That would be the developer flow. There is one other thing that I think is a really exciting halfway house between the two, which is something called transfer learning, which I can explain if you want as well.
Okay, but then we got to come back to what. So if we could do this, what would what good things would we be able to do in the browser besides identify cats, which is cute, but not something I'm likely to do.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of things. One of the things that I think there's the idea of browser, but I think there's also one of the real applications for this is PWAs, right? Is essentially apps or even just hybrid applications, right? So some of these models can actually be quite large. We probably don't want to have people, when we're so suddenly forgotten the word, careful about page load sizes that dropping in kind of a couple of megabyte model into your homepage probably isn't what you want. But however, doing something where it may perhaps loads in the background via a service worker in a PWA, and then afterwards you get some better functionality is
right for a long-lived application, something that you knew that the client, they weren't just going to use it frivolously once. This was going to be part of their ongoing an application that they wanted to use that you just happened to be built as a browser app instead of as a in HTML and JavaScript instead of having built it in native. Right? Let's imagine that scenario, because that's pretty much where we're headed, right? With spas and things like that, that's where we've been headed. We've been saying, you know what? Maybe you don't need to build an app in native mode. You can build it to run in a browser and put it on any machine, and it'll look like it was a regular app. And it's a PWA, and so you can kind of feel like it's installed. So that's the modality. And so we're willing to pay some price to download something. Now, you were going to say something about trans. What? Is that change the deal? Learning. And how does this change the deal?
The transfer learning is this amazing, fascinating area, and it's considered to be, by some of the leaders in the AI space, to be the next big kind of step jump in AI is going to come from transfer learning. Okay, and I think this is actually quite interesting because this is where it also applies more to us from a JavaScript space as well as when we take into account transfer learning. So, okay, you've got this model. You got a whole lot of data you use to train this model, whatever this model is doing. You did on the server side. You paid a lot of money to a lot of people who had to manually go through and perhaps categorize images or go through and label. You have to label the data, right? So there needs to be some manual effort initially in order to kind of pre-categorize your training data, right? So people put a lot of effort into this. But essentially what you end up these days is with a model that is very, very tightly targeted to doing just that one job that just that data was categorized in order to do. So for instance, one example might be perhaps you trained an AI model which can detect pedestrians on a street, right? And it can do that really, really well because you've got lots of training data that you tagged for that. But now you want another model which can detect bicyclists on a street, right? what you'd normally have to do is then go through the entire process of getting all that data again, and then categorizing bicycles and retraining a new model. The idea of transfer learning is, well, hang on. It's kind of hang on. A person on a street and a person riding the bike, kind of the same thing. Can we transfer some of the learning that happened from this first domain into the second domain, right? Without extending that much cost in order to be able to do so. And it turns out that you actually can, or there are cases that you can, when the domains are they have some overlap, you can transfer some of that knowledge. So remember I explained, I gave the example of a neural net just before, where you can imagine multiple nodes all in layers, and you feed in kind of pixel data for an image, and at the end you get, I don't know, a cat or dog, something like that. It turns out with some neural networks, when you look at some of those layers as they go along, imagine the layers going along, each layer kind of knows a little bit more about the image until the final layer knows that it's a cat or a dog. But a couple of layers before that, it would perhaps have a node that detects a paw, or a node that detects, this node can detect a nose, or this node can detect a right angle, or this node can detect a color. So there's kind of knowledge in this neural net, which in a way is transferable from one neural net to another, right? So it's similar stuff. You instead of wanting to detect cats and dogs, maybe you want to detect bicyclists and human beings. So what you can actually do is you can take one of these you can take one of these, the human being the pedestrian neural net, strip away maybe the last few layers, add a couple more layers, and just use that as kind of a starting point. Instead of starting from scratch, using that as a starting point, feeding in a little bit more data about bicyclists. And the magic thing is it actually transfers some of that knowledge over, and you don't have to put as much effort into to get a model that pretty accurately detects bicyclists. So that's kind of, if you imagine all the money and effort and time that's been poured into AI and creating models these days, what people are really interested in is, well, hang on, how can we be efficient about this and use those models to train up, to kind of spread the usefulness of those models to other domains, right?
Yeah, so yeah, that makes sense. I know it doesn't work this way, but it would be a little bit like if you had a model that went as far as recognizing animals, and then it went the next step farther, and it knew about cats and it knew about dogs. Well, then you could back up and say, I'll start with the one that knew about animals, and now I can do giraffes, or I'll back up and find the one that knew four-legged creatures and could tell the difference between a plant and that. So I see what you're doing. If there really were recognizable steps along the way to a particular conclusion, and if you could back up to one of those intermediate steps, then you wouldn't have to go all the way to zero. Is really
exactly. And the thing with transfer learning is you don't need to put that much more computational effort in order to add the extra training data, right? You don't have to do a full training role. In fact, you don't have to do that much at all.
Right. I only have to go back to that intermediate step, which is a step along the way to where I want to be. And then I just train from that point forward, and it's less work, right?
You need fewer training samples in order to get something a bit more accurate. Yeah.
Right. So, but this is all the back end, refining the process of building the model.
Yes.
Whether I do it from scratch or whether I do it with transfer learning, I'm still ending up with something that's going to be coming over the wire, right? Or were you suggesting that the transfer allowed me to lay a baseline down on the client and then just bring over the different, the little differences?
That's exactly right. So you would download the model, the cats and dog model, and then on your phone or whatever device you're using, you could then train it. You could use that as a baseline, and your phone is powerful enough to do the transfer learning on the client side.
Okay,
right?
You just do that last mile. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so you couldn't do the whole training on your device, but you could just do the last mile on your device. And that is, I think, that's a really interesting space for kind of JavaScript and AI as well. And if you see some of the examples that people are doing, so if you've ever seen, there's a couple of examples on TensorFlow.js website where they basically bring in the raw models and they just do the last step with transfer learning. So they've got like a fun game called Emoji Scavenger Hunt where they've got they've taken one database of all the, you can recognize images called MobileNet, So there's a database called MobileNet that you could use. You could just do an npm install MobileNet, and then you can essentially have your camera of your phone. You can point it at objects, and it's clever enough to know that something's a cup, something's a pen, something else. And then they've then taken that model, stripped away the last few layers, and retrained it on new objects and new images, which they've turned into a game. That's what they've done there. And they've also done ones where you can then use it to detect head movements for, exactly. So you can use it to detect head movements. So you can then, there's options then for doing it for, I forgot the word, accessibility, right? So you've got some raw model which knows conceptually what an edge is, what an eye might look like, and then you've stripped away the last few layers. You've retrained it on your face as you're looking at your computer screen. You can then retrain it so maybe nodding up scrolls up and nodding down scrolls down or something like that. But you can do that in the browser yourself.
That'd be really bad for me as a hand waving, head bobbing person that I am. My browser would be all over the place, left, right, up, and down.
Maybe for you, it'd be perfect. Maybe you could actually turn that into, you can multitask in your meeting.
Like Minority Report. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'd actually like to step back just a little bit. I'm fascinated by this topic, but I'm also trying to figure out here for our audience, for Angular devs in general too.
Yeah.
Where do you see the time with an Angular app? Like, when would you pull these things in, and when would you use like something like TensorFlow versus going the service-based route, which is more like what Azure or IBM and some other clouds offer?
Exactly. Yeah. So, how it ties in with Angular, I think, in large part, it's such early days. It's so difficult to know exactly how it's gonna end up. Where I can just roughly guess immediate things that I can see happening is definitely with PWAs, Angular. I see this less being used in websites, a lot more being used with devices, because devices have images, right? Cameras, audio recognition.
But wait, like so I hear you, but I want to challenge you there. Why would a PWA have access to audio and cameras, but a regular web app wouldn't?
That's a very good point.
What kind of web apps are you building, Asim, huh?
That's a very good point that you made. I think, I'm probably...
I thought your point about that was what you made earlier, Asim, which was that these things are going to be big. They're not a sort of casual, let's just run around from one website to another and expect instant application, because the models are going to be big.
I mean, not all the models are big, but I think there are models out there that are MobileNet's quite big. So you're right. There will be cases where you probably want to be. There probably are cases where you can do something really quick in the browser without much download speed. But I think for the most part, you probably are going to probably will be a large download. So when we do it as a PWA, I think also I'm unfortunately using the word PWA as a proxy for mobile web, maybe actually.
Deploy more, pay less with DigitalOcean, the simplest all-in-one cloud computing platform for developers. Scale and run cloud applications faster and more efficiently with effortless administration tools to robust compute, flexible configurations, networking services, real-time alerts, and rapid provisioning, while enjoying industry-leading price to performance with a flat pricing structure across all global data center regions at any usage volume. Spend more time building better web apps and less time worrying about managing infrastructure with DigitalOcean. Build your next app on DigitalOcean. Get started with a free $100 credit at do.co/adventures.
I think you and I both, we've had chats in the past since we worked together and about PWAs. I think we both like them a lot, but I agree. I think sometimes I'm using PWA in the context these days of more of a mobile web type app. I think a mobile web app is really what you're talking about though in this case, right? Where they'd be the best case for something like this.
Yeah.
Or at least a
web app. Yeah. I mean, yeah. But anything that can access, I think, because I think things get interesting when you access the features of a phone, right? Especially the camera. A lot of stuff doing with AI is with camera-based functionality.
Or microphone, even. There's a lot of audio-based AI now, too,
Yeah. You could do speech recognition. I was actually looking into recently to see if I could create my own oh my God, what's Alexa or OK Google, or what's ours, Cortana. So like creating my own, creating something like maybe making an OK Asim or something in JavaScript. Wouldn't that be fun? Having a website which could respond to OK Asim.
I love it. It's a PWA. It's Ask Asim.
Yeah, it's Ask Asim. Yeah. So there's you could do that. Was like, and it's purely client side. That's one of the advantages. Purely client side. You'd never have to send that audio to the server. You do that whole thing on the client side.
So when you're building one of these apps, Asim, excuse me, but I'm thinking Angular developer again. A lot of times we get asked to develop an app, and we pull in a third-party library or something. And a lot of times I'll get asked about this. Hey, is there an Angular version of that library that we can pull in? Do you need an Angular version of these things to pull in, or can you just pull in the JavaScript and use it in Angular and call it a day?
Yeah. Pull in JavaScript. You can add it in a script tag, or for Angular, you can add it as an npm install, and you can just go. You just go wild. I think. In terms of Angular, it'll be very much for building Angular applications and front-end applications. We're not going to be a pure Angular developer is probably never going to be asked to kind of train a model. I think an Angular developer is going to find it very interesting to bring one of these models, pre-trained models in and use it in their application. Okay. I think also
wire up the APIs and hook it all together. Yeah.
Hook it all together. And I could see it as like, as I said before, as a web developer, we always are very careful. We would never want to poll an API with stuff. So imagine this scenario where we created this OK Asim. We would only want to list on the client side for OK Asim. I should say OK Asim. I should say Asim. Asim. And then whatever you say next, we would maybe grab in Angular and then send to some other API. So I just got plenty that helps you analyze sound and extract text and apply commands to that, right? So I see it's a combination of both, right? Both together.
So you do as much as you can on the client, and then only go to the server when you need to. Pretty much like we normally do with things.
Exactly. And the other thing I think is quite interesting is with web components, right? So that's some of the thing else that I've been working with as well. So. Wouldn't it be really useful to create some, I don't know, with Angular elements, we can add web components, kind of compile them down natively, or even just create reusable web components. Just create reusable web components that you can just drop into websites as the tag, which just have kind of some AI functionality. Maybe this Asim thing could be a tag. Maybe something which uses the face API and detects if your ward could be just the ward -detector tag that you drop in, and only on a web page, every web page that's got that will show a little thing that only somebody who's not Ward will see.
Well, let's say we're building one of these apps, the Ask Asim app, yes. Like SG, right? For those of us who remember that. Would you, as an Angular developer, would you recommend people build something like that, or not WordBell, using TensorFlow or one of these services? Cloud services that do AI, like Azure does, or some of these others, and why?
Well, like I think it has to be for audio, especially. I think it has to be a combination of both. Right? I think it has to be a combination of both. I think that I would feel very nervous if I had an application that was constantly listening to my voice, constantly sending those snippets over to my
There's
server.
so many good stories about this. Yes.
Yes. Whereas I would feel a lot more comfortable if I knew that the application was only trained and was listening all the time, but only knew how to react once you said, "Hey, Asim." Right. I have to build this now, don't I?
So something on the client you have just enough training on the client, maybe with TensorFlow, to listen for. You must have "Hey, Asim," and maybe even a little bit more, like part of the question afterwards. Yes. So you don't have one of those strange things that ends up in the news, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then call an API in the back end, which does all the heavy lifting for it's a really detailed response. Like, what are the sports scores for today? Who won the World Cup?
Yeah. And the same goes for like image. So, I mean, even with like MobileNet and then the Face API and the Face Face.js that we have right now, you can detect stuff on the client side, but it's not as powerful as what you can get on the server side. So the client side, and I tried to use kind of MobileNet and other things. a pen it might detect as a chopstick, for instance. It's not that accurate. It's not that. It's pretty okay. It's amazing, really, to be honest with you. But it's not that accurate. You send that same image to the Azure Vision Service, and it will just give you, oh my God, so many tags, so much information about what's in the image, the type of pen. I've never told you the type of pen, but it gives you a whole more richer amount of information. But then again, you probably want to limit those API calls. We're very generous, but you still want to limit those API calls, even if it's just to save the user's bandwidth on their phone or something like that. So I see
those are good situations.
Yeah.
Like I've seen a couple of scenarios. Like, so imagine here's some scenarios to throw in our listeners' heads. Imagine you're working at some kind of a toll booth place where you want to stop cars from going through the toll booth and having to stop to pay all the time. Instead of the scanning technology, you use a vision API that scans the license plate of the car and is able to pick out where the license plate is, when it was expired, and then looks up in the database to see where's it registered. Or you're entering a public transportation place and you want to use facial recognition to make sure the people, and I don't know if these things exist or not, I'm just making this up. There's always PII stuff here too, right? You don't want privacy issues. But to scan the faces of the people to say, oh, that's Asim. He's got a monthly card. He gets to ride on the train for free. Let him go through. But those are more involved situations. But these are the kind of things we're constantly seeing out there in the wild, beyond the facial recognition, can I log into my phone kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's very interesting. Do you find it's on the training side? I know Ward touched a little on this with you earlier, but do you find training these apps to be difficult for, like on the TensorFlow side we talked about? What about on the server? How hard is that to do? Because that seems to be the hang up I hear about a lot.
You mean in terms of in terms of TensorFlow JavaScript, or in terms of TensorFlow general? In terms of
the training the models, so training the AI models so they can parse out what to actually look at, or in audio, what phrases should they listen to or not listen to?
This is probably where I kind of admit that I'm not an expert on AI, but I think that yes, I'm not.
He's like, I actually don't code Angular either.
I don't. I barely even know JavaScript. No, I mean, I think that's where a lot of the complexity lies. But I think from my research into a lot of this stuff, there's a lot of information out there right now, basically, right? So you can always grab existing models, and you can read existing papers and essentially mirror what they're doing. The real brains of what's happening in AI right now, the really clever people, the ones that are coming up with new models and new ways of training and doing the really deep research into that. But a lot of the stuff is just published in papers, and I'm not saying I can read one of these dry papers and exactly turn it into a training model, but on the server. But yeah, that is where that side of the things is simpler. And for me, I have not done any kind of deep training on the server side with a lot of this stuff, but I have then just taken pre-trained models and just started using them on the client side, because we all like to do a little bit of npm install and just start going wild with their applications.
I like that. The pre-trained models will be nice. Maybe we can provide some links at the end of the show too for where to find some of those.
Yeah,
those are helpful. I find that to be the biggest obstacle for me is I wrote, I think it was a month or two ago, I wrote with some of my buddies, Burke Holland and Brian Clark. We wrote some varying apps that used machine learning or language processing specifically, where it listened to things that you would say, it pulled out the words, and then it tried to take those words and match them to what your intentions were, two different things. Specifically, I built something that would turn the lights in my office different colors.
Oh, yeah.
Those interesting bulbs. And we got really crazy with that stuff. And I found that to me, I was like, oh man, the two big obstacles for me were, how am I going to train this thing? And the second part was, what does the API look like? And the APIs were all pretty easy, honestly, when I looked at all the varying services. But the training to me took a little bit longer. I had to go learn how to train it. Like, what is this? There's a thing called intents that you have to learn. Like, what is an intent and what is the state?
Yeah.
Have you run into that at all? Like, just having to understand what language means?
Yeah. I think that was intent. That was the Lewis platform, right? Lewis, am I saying?
Yeah, Lewis is what they call it for Azure. It's the natural language processing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And there's a website, basically, I think it's just Lewis.ai.
AI, I think. Lewis.ai.
Yeah, and basically you go in there and you just start training it how to use and listen to intents and do other stuff. But
yeah.
The first thing I was like is, wait, what's an intent and what's a state? And they're not hard, but it was like just a new terminology I had to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's just something. There's no magic bullet for that, really. I think you just have to. In each domain is going to have its own method of inputting data that's going to be specific for that domain, and I think that was just a way of structuring the data so that to give, it's just something I think you have to figure out for each platform. And I think that but it's so I think the challenge for you was in learning how to some of the terminology and in learning how to use the platform, but also I presume in grabbing a test data. Is that right?
Yeah, getting the test data. And when you have no test data to start with, that's to me what felt daunting. Not learning the platform, but okay, if I wanted to turn all these different colors and I wanted to be able to understand all my speech, I need to get all this data and actually input it into the system. Yeah.
But I also think, isn't that also a beautiful aspect of it as well? Because imagine you didn't have Lewis AI. The only way you could is that the models, the method of programming is changed. Before, you'd have to be quite explicit, in exactly programming exactly what you needed to do for exactly each scenario. Whereas now you just provide examples. You just provide a bunch of examples, and the system basically learns for you and creates the system. And I think it's just a different way of thinking about it, the problem than not. And also people that perhaps are not so clued up, for people who perhaps not so comfortable with programming, that kind of model with Lewis AI might actually be preferential to learning how to code and having to solve the problem in that way.
Did we lose Ward?
No, I'm here. I admit that it's fascinating, and I really want to be able to do this stuff, but I'm still, I'm not usually writing Angular apps in which I run around with a phone camera on or the mic on and trying to detect something. And I'm trying to understand the fundamental principle about when it makes sense to do AI at the edge like this, in the edge device. Mm-hmm. And when it's just like, hey, you know what, I'm going to just chuck it back at the server and let the server grind on it quickly. And why do I have to have anything down here in my browser for this purpose? Mm-hmm. And that's where, so I get your scenario about, we can't be hanging the server up watching all the cameras in the world. The cameras ought to be able to wait, at the peripheral device ought to be able to be the first line that detects something worth sending to the back end. Mm. So that makes total sense to me. That's just an appropriate division of labor. But I'm trying to think that what that means, though, is that this peripheral, this phone or whatever it is out here, is doing work all the time and saving the server from being bothered with something that the server shouldn't need. Is that a operating principle here?
That's just something that is an operating, for me, that's an operating principle for one of the reasons why I would want to use TensorFlow.js, because I was using a lot of the APIs previously with honestly a lot of these kind of rather dumb mechanisms of just polling every second and kind of a lot of wasteful resources. So for me, that immediately felt like a really good example.
It would if I'm doing camera stuff, but if I would, take another AI problem like, say you were trying to do address scrubbing, is that really an address or something that a regular pedestrian application would do? It's not like I'm doing that all the time, so I might as well just send that back to the server and have it say, that really doesn't look like an address.
Absolutely right. Yeah, that is exactly the kind of use case where I'd throw it back to the server. Yeah.
So most of my use cases that I keep coming up with, let me say a medical thing. I'll give you another example. Where I'm trying to do is go with practical apps. Suppose I'm trying to develop an app that where I can go around to patients and I can sort of quickly see if there's some condition in their vitals that I'm detecting just being the doctor walking around that should signal something. Again, I'm doing a data gathering thing, but I could just post that to the back end because I'm not trying to save the back end from being drowning in something. I do the gather. I send it to the back end. It gives me an answer, and ta-da! And so that's not the case for AI in the browser. And the case you've made for AI in the browser is where it needs to be doing AI watching all the time. That's what I'm hearing. Am I wrong? Am I right?
You are. I think that's a strong use case for AI in the browser. I think just taking it one step further, and AI on the device as well, though. A device has a number of sensors, which maybe a browser would have it as well. Let's say browser on the device. A number of sensors that give you real-time data. Right? Image is just your video stream is just a stream of images, right? But then you have a stream of sensor data from your compass and a variety of other things. Maybe you want to keep that data. Maybe you don't want to pass that data over to a server. There's an argument for doing AI on the client side and keeping your data on the client side as well, right? So not having to send images over to a server, not having to send perhaps your GPS location over to a server. Are there other? I think there's applications of AI on the client side for privacy as well. Is I suppose what I'm saying here also. So yes, you're right. Real-time AI is a great use case for kind of JavaScript and AI, and also for client-side JavaScript AI. And also, keeping data private on your own devices and keeping it local is probably another really good use case for AI in JavaScript as well. Yeah.
Is there anything special about using Angular with this AI stuff? Should I figure out that I actually have a use case, or is it? Is there anything remarkable about using Angular with this, or is it just something that Angular developers, like everybody else, should know about?
I think it's I think you're right. I think it's not something that is unique to Angular. I think that I'm a fan of Angular, so I think that Angular is a great platform for building the types of applications which we may want to use TensorFlow.js. But it's true, you can build the same applications using a number of other frameworks as well. But I do think it's interesting because I do think we need to know about this stuff because I'm imagining in the future, and our space moves very, very fast. So I'm imagining in the future we are going to start to see situations where now JavaScript developers are going to have to learn a little bit more about AI. They're going to start working in firms which are leveraging a lot more AI, where they're just given a model and they're told, listen, we need to implement this somehow in our application. So I think we need to be aware of it from that perspective as well. And also just the options. As soon as you know something exists, then when you're faced with a problem in the future, you can then know that, well, maybe we can solve this with a little bit of AI. I think it's always good to know, right? So then when you're faced with a problem in the future, you can pull on that knowledge and perhaps use the technology to solve your problem. Yeah.
Cool. So Asim, as we kind of wrap up this discussion, we always like to kind of lead people to, if you want to get started with these technologies, using Angular with AI specifically, where would you lead them to?
So a couple of places. If you want to learn, I was going to have it for picks, but I'll just do it now. Actually, if I can do a little bit.
Let's roll right into your picks. You can start it. Go for it.
Okay.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
So I think the first pick is a little bit of self-promotion, but I think it helps everybody on the podcast itself. There's a website I'm launching with a couple of other people who are passionate about the space called AiJS.rocks. And what this is if you do want to learn about AI and JavaScript, this is kind of broader than just TensorFlow, deep learning, client-side libraries. It includes APIs as well. And any way in which you can do AI in JavaScript, so either using TensorFlow.js or using an API, you can go to AiJS.rocks. There's a bunch of different example applications using a bunch of different technologies. You can click on them. You can view source on the demos. You can then find out information about how it was built. And we're designing this place just to be a really good inspirational page, just to show what people are doing in this space, because it's very, very new. and also not only we didn't just want it to be just a place where you can like, hey, look at this cool, fun stuff, but also, hey, how did they build it? How is this made? What libraries is it using? What APIs is it calling? It's a little bit more information about that, so you can then learn how to build something yourself in the future. I think it's going to be a good resource to figure out what's possible in this space, and it's obviously going to grow as we go along. And I think that's actually probably going to be a really good place to go to kind of start your journey of figuring out what can you do with AI and JavaScript, and if it's for you. Yeah, I think that's a good place to start.
Ward, you got some picks?
I am pickless today, so I'm going to pass.
You're pickless, or are you pickles?
I'm pickles. I'm pickles. I'm
Pickles?
pickless. I did not prepare a pick.
Well, I have a couple picks in here. One of them is technical related. We were talking about Lewis, which is the language understanding services for Azure. And I've gotten to really actually enjoy using these. I never thought I'd get into this, but it's actually pretty cool. I'm playing quite a bit, and you can check it out yourself. We'll put a link in the show notes. There's a short link that I've got. We can put there. It's basically just Google Lewis.ai and you'll find it. Super easy. Lewis is Luis. But it helps you train models very quickly. You can do some really cool things like turn on and off your lights, or you can set up a text messaging system if you use something like Twilio, where it listens to text messages to then do something. Even combines things with like serverless functions, which are pretty cool. So I found it super easy to use and not hard to get started with. There's actually some pretty good stuff there. So check out Lewis. And as a second thing, I watched a movie recently. I was on a long flight with my family, and my daughter, Madeline, she put me onto a movie. She's like, Dad, you got to check out this cool movie. It's called Murder on the Orient Express. And I had no idea they made this into a recent movie. Read the book eons ago. I think you grew up with Agatha Christie, right, Ward?
Yes, and actually, it's been made a movie many times, but I think you're talking about the most recent one.
Yeah, I saw the one when I was a kid. I forget who was in it, but loved it. It's actually how I got introduced to Agatha Christie novels by watching that movie originally. I loved the story. The great mystery writer. And the recent movie, was it like a year or two ago that it came out, Ward? Have you seen it?
Yes, I did, and I enjoyed it.
I did too. Really did. It was fascinating. So many great popular actors in it as well. So if you're just into celebrity bingo, there's probably 10 famous actors in this movie, and I won't give away who all of them are. Some of them you won't even recognize. And probably halfway through the movie, you'll be like, that person looks familiar and the voice sounds familiar. Who is that? So won't ruin that for you, but check out that movie, Murder on the Orient Express. My kids watched it all the way from ages 13 up, and so did my wife and I, and we all enjoyed it.
You know, this talk actually reminded me that I do have a pick.
Because no going back. No going back, Mr.
No going back. Okay, so I'm doing it anyway. One of our friends, a friend of the show, a friend of Angular, Pascal Precht, has actually devoted an awful lot of his time and his little company's time, ThoughtRam's time, along with Christoph, to machine labs. And I'm putting it here. And it bills itself as fast and easy machine learning without leaving the browser. And I don't know how that relates to TensorFlow or anything else. I know that in speaking with him, his focus has really been on how to make it easy to for people who aren't deep into machine learning to be able to get benefit from it. And so we ought to tell the world about that too. So I'm putting a link in for that.
And you know Pascal very well in that whole project, don't you, Asim?
Yeah, I think from the way I would describe machine labs is, I think for Angular, is like Plunker or Stack Blitz for AI. That's kind of the way I would describe it. Yeah. So you can do it in the browser and then pass a link on to people, and then it's not using TensorFlow.js. It's using kind of Dockerized containers in the back end to actually run your stuff. So it's basically Python from what unless it changed recently. But last time I checked, it was Python running on actual servers as presented to you in a browser. Really cool
stuff. So it's not the thing you're talking about where we're executing the machine learning in the browser. You're making a server call. So it's kind of an alternative to say the Azure calls or something like that, or
it's much more just as a learning tool. So you can not maybe not even a learning tool, but like a tool just to you know how useful it is to have a Stack Blitz link. And then you share it with somebody, and then they can run it, and it's all good. But you probably wouldn't use that in your production application. You would just use it as something else. Well, there's a wasp in my room right now, and I'm not scared.
There's a wasp in your room?
Yeah, it's a wasp.
It's a myth. It's a myth in my room.
I'm just telling you so you know that I'm not scared in the slightest.
I wish we could show the video of this podcast. Watching Asim just look around the room.
Yeah, I am.
He is poised to pounce. Okay. There was a little fear. I saw it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think if that's all we have for picks, folks, then that wraps up this episode. Asim, thank you so much for coming on to our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.